I'll be speaking to a neurodiversity champion, an advocate for people with learning difficulties. That's Nathaniel Hawley in a short while to learn about his experiences.
The sound of London. BBC Radio London.
Jumoke, Fashola in the afternoon.
Now, let's turn our attention to this. Dyslexia is a learning difficulty that affects 1 in 10 people in the UK. It can affect them during their education, everyday life, and in their jobs. Well, my next guest is a neurodiversity champion and an advocate for people with learning differences. Nathaniel Hawley was diagnosed with dyslexia at a young age and now helps neurodivergent job seekers to find meaningful employment. And Nathaniel joins me now. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon.
Oh, hiya. No, my pleasure.
Let's start with your own experience, if you wouldn't mind. Can you tell me a bit about your experience with dyslexia?
For me, I was always a bit of a slow developer. I learnt to talk later than my peers, learnt to write a lot later. I only learnt to read in secondary school. I spent most of my years feeling that I wasn't as smart as everyone else, that I had lower expectations. Most people, you tend to rise to the expectations that people have of you, and mine weren't that high at the time.
What changed it for you? Was it the identification that you had dyslexia, that diagnosis?
The identification definitely helped, but it wasn't the turning point. That's because people didn't really know about it. It's come a long way. People have heard of it, but I think people have a very basic, very outdated understanding. They think it's about not being able to read or write when that's not it at all. It might be a part of it, but not for many of us. The turning point for me was when I stopped following the status quo of the main education system and tried teaching myself in ways that work for me. And then I realized, you know what? I am pretty smart. I just had to do things in an alternative way. Easier said than done when the education system is a right or wrong answer.
Yes.
But in the workforce, it can be easier if you understand how your mind works.
And that sounds like it's the key. Tell us a bit about the signs of dyslexia.
Well, again, when people think of dyslexia, they think it's about reading and writing. Neurodiversity is a massive spectrum. We like to put people in little pockets or pigeonhole them because it's easier to do, but in reality, it doesn't work like that. I like to think of it as the fluctuation of abilities. So you've got things that you're really good at and things that you struggle with more than the average person. Someone with dyslexia may struggle with comprehension, they might struggle with memory, phonologics, speaking. But on the contrary, they might be exceptionally creative. They might be amazing public speakers. So rather than thinking of the deficits of what dyslexia is, it's just more highs and lows of different skill sets.
And I suppose for all of us, whatever conditions we may be affected by, the key thing about our lives is to know ourselves and know what our strengths and our weaknesses are. And that sounds like a message that you're putting across, particularly to job seekers.
Oh, definitely. If you ask someone what they're good at, they'll probably struggle. You ask someone what they're bad at, they'll be able to go on forever. And that's not because they do not have good things about them. It's because they've always been kind of marked and judged against things that aren't their strength. It's about finding what you're already good at and really utilizing that and trying to find the right position and organization for you.
And just, you've trained over 2,500 individuals. Are there, which is a lot of people, is there a moment when you're in conversation or I don't know how big these seminars are, etc., where you can see the aha moment for them?
Yeah, no, I think there is. Another kind of misconception with dyslexia is we often think it's for children, but the vast majority of the people are adults, maybe like 40 over. And I think that's because they spent their whole entire life not really understanding how their mind works, the difficulties. Let's say, for example, they were maybe in a physical trade, but now due to physical health, they can't do that. So they're having to reskill and relearn and realize that had they known about their dyslexia when they were younger, they very well could have gone into a different profession. So when you explain to them that it's not about intelligence or, yeah, I know this is how you were told to do it, but if you tried it this way, and they're like, you know what, that describes me to the T, and that works. And it's almost like a bit of a rebirth, because now they have so many other job opportunities open to them, ones that they would have never considered in a million years beforehand.
And it's actually quite striking and in some ways shocking to hear that people over 40 are the most affected, or those people who come into this awareness. How does that impact their relationship with their employers? And what do employers need to do in order to facilitate those people who have those kind of challenges?
I think it's to acknowledge that dyslexia isn't a new thing. It's been around forever. When it comes to language and reading and writing those challenges, it's a really new problem, because we've only had the majority of the population being able to do writing and reading on a daily basis since the Industrial Revolution. Before then, it just wasn't a thing that needed to be done. So that makes you kind of realize, okay, I can understand. You're purposely making your brain do something that it wasn't made to do in the first place. And then understanding that, okay, well, my kid has it, my nephew has it, and they don't seem to mind because it's been destigmatized a lot in recent years. Most people under 30 will quite comfortably talk about it without even a second thought. And the reason why people over 30 or 40 might struggle to approach that conversation, number one, they probably don't even know they are dyslexic.
Right.
Number two, if they do know, they're probably embarrassed of it, or they're proud of it, but they do not believe their manager or who they work with would have an up-to-date understanding. It is really difficult, because when we think of like learning challenges, you might think something like autism, and like, oh, that's a lot more severe. But dyslexia has its own unique challenges when it comes to broaching the conversations, and that is everyone thinks they know what it is. And that's the key difficulty there. It's not like, oh, I don't know what that is, I want to learn about it. Most people think, I know enough. And that misinformation creates an environment where most people wouldn't want to mention it. And there's consequences for not having that type of environment. People can burn out easier, they can struggle. No one is saying that people with dyslexia can't do the job in hand.
Yeah.
But what we are saying is that all those tasks, which goes against how their brain would naturally process information, takes a toll on the brain.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that day in and day out, it chips away a bit, and it can lead to mental health issues. It's all connected.
I'm struck, you know, we touched on briefly on the signs of dyslexia, and I think it's quite important that in a way we expand on that, just so people are clear, because it's so easy to, as you have rightly pointed out, go down this pathway where we think we know what people are going through, but actually we don't. I mean, the idea that people potentially confuse the order of letters in words, or that they have poor or inconsistent spelling. Are there some other things that we should be looking out for?
Probably the biggest challenge is around memory, and that's not something you would normally associate with dyslexia. It's being able to retain the information that you've been given, and the best way to support that is finding an alternative way of delivering it. A great example is I really struggle with reading because I'm dyslexic, and that's not because I can't read, but it's because how my brain looks at the letters, it interprets it, and it's always trying to find the quickest route to the answer, which is a really amazing skill.
Yes.
But when the answer of reading is really simple, yes or no, did you read all the letters, that's when difficulties arise. So what I try to do is think, okay, well, rather than just not try at all, is there another way of receiving the same information? So I normally listen to audiobooks while also reading a book, or I get all my computer to read back to me. Some people might say, oh, it's not really reading, but ultimately you get the same information.
Yeah.
So if you're the type of person who thinks you know you're an intelligent person, there's other activities that you're good at or you even excel at, but there's some things which you struggle with more than other people of your same age and ability, then that is a core sign of dyslexia. And if those challenges tend to be more around reading, pronunciation, memory retention, recalling information, then it's possible that you may have signs of dyslexia.
Can I just say it's so inspiring talking to you because you're really making it very clear for us. I think
I'm glad.
so many of us are sitting there going, what is this? We think we know, as you rightly pointed out. I mean, someone has just texted in saying, I suffer terrible with numbers, dates and times. I always go to appointments at the wrong time and date. I mean, that's an illustration right there of the kind of thing you're talking about.
Absolutely. For the numbers, there's another thing called dyscalculia, which is similar to dyslexia, but more focused on numbers and recalling shapes. There's also dyspraxia, which goes hand in hand with dyslexia. So, as I mentioned before, using kind of these labels aren't always so helpful. They can be, but ultimately it's a big spectrum, and depending what characteristics you get is normally what diagnosis you get. Most people who have one, I think, are twice as likely than the rest of the population to also have an additional one.
Right.
So, for example, I have dyslexia and dyspraxia. That means I struggle with coordination, memory, balance, and reading. But you could easily have ADHD and dyslexia. So it's really not uncommon to have multiple characteristics.
And I think the challenge for us going forward as a society is to embrace all these, and I use the word differences without trying to be, sort of non-PC, but to embrace these differences, learn about them, and celebrate the things that come out of them that are unique and special.
Absolutely. I think we're beyond the pity approach now. Oh, bless them, let's get them support.
Absolutely.
How about we stop at just accepting difference, but start utilising different?
Yeah.
Rather than putting someone in a dead-end job and say, well, they're dyslexic, they're lucky to have a job, why don't we find a position for them where that kind of out-of-the-box, innovative, more expressive way of working can actually be a massive benefit? And there's so many jobs where that could work. For instance, people in sales tend to be great. They have stronger people skills. Or you might be able to work in an innovation position or as a supervisor or a manager.
Yes.
I've noticed that it can be quite difficult for people who are neurodiverse to get their foot in the door, to get those entry-level jobs. But once they've had those jobs and been able to go up the food chain a little bit, then they absolutely thrive because they aren't constrained by the typical, this is how you do it this way, that you normally get when you first start off.
Yeah. Nathaniel, I'm going to have to leave it there, but you're head of community investment at Exceptional Individuals. Is there a link or a website that people can go to if they're interested in your work?
Yeah, just go to exceptionalindividuals.com, and we're a social enterprise. All the work we do for individuals is completely free, and we also work with a lot of great companies that we make sure they have the training needed to support people who have dyslexia.
Well, you've been absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. I've learnt so much from you this afternoon. Nathaniel Hawley, who's head of community investment at Exceptional Individuals.